"There's no swimsuit in here, Claire." She smiled slowly and said, "I know." My neighbor knocked on my door at 11:46 at night. Hottest summer Austin had seen in 30 years. She stood there in a cream tank top, a loose skirt, and a look in her eyes that made the heat feel like something else entirely. She said she wanted to go swimming at a secret lake 40 minutes away. No lights, no crowds, just moonlight and dark water. I reached into her bag at the end of that old pier and felt 2 towels, 2 bottles of water, and absolutely nothing else. Then she turned, walked to the edge, and disappeared into the dark. Subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far one midnight swim can travel. I was 32 years old, and I was lying flat on my back, on top of my sheets, at 11:46 at night, soaked in sweat, staring at a ceiling fan that was working so hard, it sounded like it was about to take flight without me. The air conditioner in my duplex had given up 2 days earlier. Not slowed down, not struggled. Given up completely the way certain people give up on you, sudden total no warning. The irony was not lost on me. I fix air conditioners for a living. I had spent 14 hours that day crawling through attics and squeezing behind water heaters repairing units for families who were desperate people with babies, people with elderly parents, people who looked at me like I was the last human being on earth who could save them. And I had saved them. Every single one. I came home, peeled off my uniform, drank an entire bottle of water in one pull, and lay down on my bed in the dark. My own unit was still broken. Austin had not seen a heat wave like this in 30 years. The kind of heat that doesn't just sit on you, it gets inside you. It finds the soft places. And with the rolling blackouts, the city had started rotating through the neighborhoods. The nights weren't giving anyone relief. You'd lose power for 2 hours, get it back for 40 minutes, lose it again. People were sleeping in their cars with the engine running. People were doing things they wouldn't normally do. I had to be up in 4 hours and 45 minutes. I closed my eyes. I tried to will myself unconscious. Then someone knocked on my door. Not a timid knock. Not an apologetic knock. 3 sharp, deliberate raps, the kind that say, "I know you're awake, and I know you can hear me, so don't even think about pretending otherwise." I sat up. I grabbed the shirt off my bedpost, thought about putting it back on, and then decided it was too hot for that particular decision. I walked to the door in my gym shorts and pulled it open, half expecting it to be my landlord or a neighbor with a plumbing emergency. It was Claire Bennett. She was standing on my porch in a cream tank top and a loose summer skirt, and she had her canvas bag over one shoulder, and she was smiling at me the way people smile when they've already decided something and they're just waiting for you to catch up. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said back like an absolute genius. I had known Claire for almost a year. She lived 3 feet to my right. Literally, the walls of our duplex were thin enough that I had once heard her singing to herself while she did the dishes, and I had sat on my side of the wall for 10 full minutes, just listening without saying a word, which is the kind of thing you don't admit to people. We shared a porch. We had shared maybe 300 cups of coffee on that porch over 11 months. We had talked about everything. Her work as a graphic designer, my work as a technician, her move from Chicago, my childhood in San Marcos, her disaster of a relationship with some guy named Ryan, who she didn't talk about in detail, but who she mentioned just enough for me to understand that he had done real damage. I had told her about Melissa, more than I'd told anyone. And in all of those mornings and evenings and late-night conversations through screen doors, neither of us had ever crossed the line that both of us could see perfectly clearly. Tonight, standing on my porch at 11:46 in the worst heat Austin had felt in decades. Claire looked at me like the line wasn't there. "Come swimming with me," she said. I blinked at her. "I'm sorry. Swimming." She held up the canvas bag. "There's a lake about 40 minutes out. My grandparents had a cabin near there when I was a kid. There's an old path to the pier. Nobody goes out there at night." "Claire, it's almost midnight." "I know what time it is, Noah. The park is closed." "The park has been closed since 8. The pier is outside the park boundary." She tilted her head slightly. "Are you telling me you know the park regulations off the top of your head at midnight? Or are you just looking for reasons to say no?" That was a very Claire thing to say. Direct. No decoration. She had this way of cutting straight to the thing you were actually doing, instead of the thing you were pretending to do, and it was simultaneously one of the most attractive and most unsettling qualities a person had ever had near me. "I have to work at 4:30, I said. "It's 40 minutes each way. We'd be back before 2. "I've been on my feet for 14 hours. "Noah." "I'm serious, Noah." Her voice changed. It got quieter. Not softer, quieter. There's a difference. Soft means gentle. Quiet means real. "You have spent the past year surviving your life. You wake up, you go fix things for other people. You come home, you lie in the dark, and then you do it again. When is the last time you actually did something just because you wanted to?" I didn't answer, because the answer was a number that embarrassed me. "Come with me," she said again. "One night. Just come." The problem was, she was right. She had put her finger directly on the thing I didn't like looking at. Since Melissa and I had ended, since that whole chapter of my life had collapsed in a way that I hadn't seen coming. Even though I probably should have, I had built my life into something very manageable and very small. I worked. I went home. I watched games. I had coffee with Claire because Claire was safe, because Claire didn't ask anything of me. Because our relationship existed in this perfectly calibrated zone, where we could care about each other without either of us having to risk anything. I had told myself that was wisdom. Standing at my door at midnight, looking at a woman who had made a different choice than I had, I suddenly wasn't so sure. "Let me get my shoes," I said. She smiled. And just for a second the heat felt different. We took her car because mine was running low on gas, and she drove with the windows down because the air conditioning in her Subaru was also on its last legs, which seemed like a fitting metaphor for both of us. The highway out of Austin was nearly empty, just scattered headlights and the sound of the wind and the orange glow of the city fading behind us. For the first 15 minutes we talked about nothing important. Her day, my day. A coworker of hers who had taken credit for an entire design concept she'd developed over 3 weeks. A family I'd helped that morning, an older couple in their 80s, in a house that must have hit 110 degrees. I'd gotten their unit running in under an hour, and the wife had cried. Actually cried. I'd stood there in their kitchen holding a wrench and not known what to do with my hands. "That's a beautiful story," Claire said. "I mean, it's just my job." "Noah." She glanced at me. "That woman cried because she was grateful, because you helped her when she needed it. That's not just a job, that's something. You make it sound more meaningful than it is." "No, I think you make it sound less meaningful than it is." She said it without any heat in her voice, just as a statement of fact. "You do that with a lot of things." I looked out the window. The fields on either side of the highway were dark and flat and seemed to go on forever. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can ask me anything." "Why me tonight? Why did you knock on my door?" She was quiet for a moment, long enough that I thought she might not answer. "Because you make me feel safe," she said finally. And I don't say that lightly because I have not felt safe with very many people. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I could say anything that would be equal to that sentence. "And because," she continued, "I think you've been waiting for something to happen to you instead of making something happen. And I thought maybe you needed someone to knock on your door. You think I need someone to manage me? I think you need someone to remind you that you're allowed to want things." She said it carefully, precisely, like she'd been holding it in her hands for a while. "You spend all day giving people what they need. You're very good at it. But I've never once heard you say what you need." That landed somewhere deep and uncomfortable. I shifted in the seat. "What made you trust me?" I asked, because it was safer than responding to what she'd just said. "You fixed Eleanor's smoke detector at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday, without being asked," she said. "You spent 40 minutes on it. I watched you from my window. You didn't know I was watching. You didn't do it for credit. You just did it because it needed doing." Eleanor Price, our neighbor on the other end of the duplex. 78 years old, bad hip, permanently worried expression that softened whenever she talked to Claire. "Eleanor shouldn't have to live with a broken smoke detector," I said. "No, she shouldn't." Claire smiled at the road. And you're the kind of person who does something about that without making a production of it. That's rare, Noah. That's actually rare. I sat with that. We drove for another 20 minutes. The city was fully behind us now. Real dark out here, the kind of dark you forget about when you live somewhere with streetlights. Stars everywhere. The temperature had dropped maybe 4 degrees, which in context felt like mercy. "Can I tell you something?" I said. "Yes." "I almost didn't open the door." "I know. I heard you knock and I thought about just lying there." "I know that too." "How?" "Because I almost didn't knock." She glanced at me again, and for just a second, I caught something in her face that I recognized because I'd felt it myself. That edge between wanting something and being terrified of it. I stood on the porch for about 4 minutes before I knocked. I argued with myself the entire time. "What made you do it?" She smiled, but it was smaller this time, more real. I asked myself what I would regret more. Knocking and being wrong, or not knocking and never knowing. I absorbed that. "And," I said. "Not knocking," she said simply. "Not knocking would have been worse." She turned off the highway onto a narrow road I wouldn't have noticed in daylight, let alone at midnight. We drove for another 5 minutes on gravel, then she pulled over and cut the engine. Through the windshield I could see trees, and through the trees I could see water catching the moonlight. "Here," she said. We walked the path with her phone flashlight cutting through the dark. I could hear the lake before I could see it clearly, the soft sound of water moving gently against a shoreline. Frogs somewhere in the dark, the occasional click of something in the trees I decided not to investigate. The pier was there. Old wooden, the boards uneven with age but solid when I tested the first plank with my weight. It stretched out over the water maybe 20 feet. At the end of it, the lake opened up wide, dark and still, and the moon was right there, enormous, turning the surface silver. I realized I hadn't said a word in about 3 minutes. "Okay," I said. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I see why you wanted to come here." She smiled, set her bag down on the pier, unzipped it, reached inside. She pulled out 2 towels, 2 bottles of water, and nothing else. I looked at the bag. I looked at her. She was already looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, which was new because usually I could read Claire pretty well. "Claire." "Yes." "Did you forget something?" She held my gaze for a long moment. "No." One word. Calm. Absolutely certain. My heart did something complicated. "You didn't bring a swimsuit," I said. "I did not." "For either of us." "That's correct." "You invited me to go swimming." "I invited you to come to the lake," she said carefully. "Those aren't necessarily the same thing." I stood there. The water was right there. The moonlight was right there. Claire was right there looking at me the way she had on the porch, like she had already decided something, and she was waiting for me to catch up. "You planned this," I said. "I decided not to overthink it," she said, which was not the same thing as saying no. Here is what I understood in that moment, standing on that old pier in the dark, with the heat finally lifting slightly off my shoulders. This was not what it might look like to someone who didn't know us. This was not a reckless invitation between strangers. This was 11 months of mornings on a shared porch. This was someone saying, "Here is the line we've been carefully walking around for almost a year. What do you want to do about it?" And I also understood something else. Something about myself that I had not been willing to look at directly. I had been safe with Claire because I had chosen not to want more. Not because I didn't want more, I wanted more from the first week. I had chosen not to want more because wanting more meant being vulnerable, and being vulnerable meant someone could disappoint you. And I had been disappointed in ways that had taken me 2 years to stop replaying. Melissa hadn't just ended an engagement. She'd spent 3 years before that quietly, consistently telling me that who I wasn't quite enough. My job wasn't ambitious enough. My apartment wasn't nice enough. My dreams weren't big enough. She'd said it gently. Always, she'd never been cruel about it, but she'd said it often enough that I had started to believe it. And when the engagement ended, I'd told myself I was relieved. But the thing about relief when it's mixed up with grief is that it takes a long time to tell them apart. I had spent the 18 months since then keeping everything at a careful distance. I had kept Claire at a careful distance. Standing there, I realized that was not wisdom. That was fear wearing wisdom's clothes. Claire was watching me. She hadn't moved, hadn't pushed, hadn't said another word. She was giving me the space to figure out where I was. Then she reached down to the hem of her tank top, slowly watching me the whole time, and she turned and walked to the edge of the pier. She stepped off into the dark water without looking back. There was a moment. One of those moments you know you'll remember for a long time, where the world kind of holds still. I stood at the edge of the pier. I could hear the water. I could hear her. "Noah," she said from the dark, and her voice was different now, lighter, almost laughing. "It's the best thing I've felt in months. Stop thinking and get in the water." I turned away like the gentleman my mother raised me to be. I heard her laugh at that, a real laugh, surprised and warm. I pulled off my shirt. I folded it and set it on the pier. And then before I could second-guess myself for the 47th time, I stepped off the edge. The water was cool enough to shock the breath out of me. After 14 hours in 104-degree heat, after 2 days in a broken apartment, after 2 years of carefully managed distance, the water felt like forgiveness. I came up gasping and laughing at the same time, and Claire laughed too, and the sound of it carried out over the lake in the dark. "Okay," I managed. "Okay, you were right." "I usually am," she said, treading water a few feet away. "You'll get used to it. Don't push it. Too late." We swam in no particular direction, out toward the middle of the lake, and then back toward the pier, not talking much for a while, just moving through the water and letting the temperature of it undo the hours. At some point, she challenged me to race her to the end of the pier and back, and I won barely, and she accused me of cheating, and I had not cheated. And we argued about it for about 3 minutes. In the specific, delighted way you argue about something completely meaningless, because arguing about it means you're still talking. We ended up hanging off the pier ladder side by side, just breathing. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You already asked me that tonight, and then asked something I was not fully prepared for. This one is easier." She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the water. Was this a mistake? I looked at her profile, the line of her jaw, the way she was waiting for the answer without turning toward me like she was giving me room to be honest. "Probably a terrible idea," I said. "Also, probably the best decision either one of us has made in months." She turned then. "I can work with that." "I figured you could." She was quiet for a moment. The frogs were still going somewhere in the dark. The water made small sounds against the ladder. "Every time we sit on the porch," she said, "I think about what it would be like if you kissed me." I heard it. Let it land where it needed to land. "I've thought about the same thing," I said. "Then why haven't you?" "Because I didn't want to break what we had." "Noah." Her voice went very quiet. "What we had was never the thing I wanted. It was the thing we both agreed to settle for because neither of us wanted to take the risk." She finally looked at me directly. "I shouldn't have to keep paying for what Melissa did to you." That hit like cold water, more cold than the lake, because it was true, and I knew it was true, and I had never heard it said that plainly before. "You're right," I said. "I know I am. I've been protecting myself and calling it protecting you." "Yes." She said it simply, without blame, just as a fact that she was ready to acknowledge together. I reached out, in the water, and I touched her face, and she let me. She tilted her chin up the smallest amount, and then I kissed her, and it was not dramatic. It was not some explosive movie scene thing. It was quiet. It was the end of a very long 11 months of wanting to. It was two people who had both been hurt before being careful and sure and completely present. When it ended, neither of us moved away. We stayed close. "Okay," I said softly. "Yeah," she said. "Okay." We climbed back up onto the pier eventually. Towels, water, the boards creaking gently beneath us. We sat at the end with our feet hanging off the edge, and the night was cooler out here than it had been in the city, and the stars were doing everything. Stars do. And for maybe the first time in a very long time, I did not feel like I was waiting for something bad to happen. "Let's have dinner tomorrow," I said. "A real dinner. Just us." "You mean like a date?" "I mean exactly like a date." She smiled. Then her expression shifted into something else. Something I didn't quite recognize yet. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. And the tone of it, the change in her voice, made me understand that whatever she was about to say had been there this whole time. Before the knock on my door. Before the drive. Before the lake. "My company offered me a promotion," she said. "A big one. I'd be running the national creative team out of Seattle, leading it. It's everything I've spent 5 years building toward." I looked at her. "They need an answer in 3 days," she said. The water kept moving below us. The frogs kept singing. Everything was the same as it had been 30 seconds before, and everything was completely different. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I said. She looked at me steadily. "Because I needed to know if this what's between us was real. I couldn't make this decision the way I wanted to make it without knowing that." "Claire, I'm not asking you to decide for me. I'm not asking you to give me an answer tonight. I just needed you to know." She held my gaze. I needed to stop pretending that it didn't matter. Both things, the promotion and this. I sat with the weight of that. The lake, the pier, the moonlight. Two things that couldn't both be true at the same time, except apparently they could, and apparently they were. "You should take it," I said, because it was the logical thing, because it was true. Her face changed, just slightly, but I caught it. "That's not what I was hoping you'd say," she said carefully. "What were you hoping I'd say?" "I was hoping you'd say that losing me would matter." Her voice was even, controlled, but her eyes were doing something different. "I wasn't asking you to sacrifice anything. I wasn't asking you to make a choice tonight. I just wanted to hear that the idea of me leaving is not nothing to you." I opened my mouth. And then I did the thing that I have done my entire adult life when the emotional stakes get too high. I went logical. I went practical. I went to the safe place where feelings can't find me. "We've kissed once," I said. "You have a career opportunity. These are facts." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stood up, picked up her towel, and started walking back down the pier. "Claire, I heard you," she said without turning around. "I heard exactly what you said." The drive home was mostly silent. Not angry silent. Worse than that. Tired silent. The kind of silence that happens when two people understand each other too well. I dropped her at her door. She said goodnight the way you say goodnight to someone you're not angry at, but that you're grieving something with. I stood on the porch long enough to feel stupid about it. Then I called out, "Hey." She stopped, hand on her doorknob. "Do you still want to have dinner tomorrow?" I said. A long pause, the kind that could have gone either direction. "Yes," she said, still not turning around. "Yes, I do." She went inside. I stood in the heat for another minute. The night was still warm, still dark, still everything it had been 2 hours before. Except now I was standing outside my door with the full understanding that I had almost done it again. Almost chosen the logical, safe, distant thing instead of the real thing. Almost talked myself out of the most honest moment I'd had in 2 years. She hadn't asked me to move. She hadn't asked me to beg. She had only asked me to admit that she mattered. And instead of saying yes, I had handed her a fact. I stood there until the heat drove me inside. And lying on my back in my broken apartment, staring at the ceiling fan working itself toward failure. I finally admitted the thing I'd been circling around all night. I was terrified. Not of Claire. Of what it would cost me to let Claire matter. Because Melissa had mattered. Melissa had mattered to me in a way that had rearranged how I thought about myself, and when that ended, something in me had decided quietly with great confidence that the safest thing was to never let anything rearrange you again. That decision had kept me safe for 2 years. It had also kept me here, alone, in a broken apartment, on the hottest night in 30 years, surviving my life instead of living it. That's what she'd said to me on the porch. like she could see it from 3 feet away through the wall we'd been pretending wasn't there. I set my alarm for 4:15, closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I was not trying to make myself stop thinking. I was letting myself think. Letting myself want something. Letting myself sit with the terrifying honest truth that tomorrow night I was going to walk next door and say the things I'd been not saying for 11 months. Whatever came next, at least that part would be real. I fell asleep to the sound of the fan working hard. The heat still sitting on the city, and somewhere in the duplex. Next to me, the quiet sound of someone else lying awake, probably wondering if she'd made a mistake. She hadn't. Neither had I. Noah showed up at her door at 7 the next evening, holding a small cactus in a terracotta pot. Not flowers, a cactus. He had stood in the garden center for 11 minutes, he knew, because he checked his phone twice, holding a bouquet of sunflowers in one hand and the cactus in the other, and something about the cactus felt more honest. Flowers say, "I'm sorry," in the way that everyone says I'm sorry. A cactus says, "I know I'm difficult. I know I have sharp edges, but I'm still showing up." Claire opened the door, looked at the cactus, looked at him and said, "Is that your version of an apology?" "It's my version of flowers," he said. She studied it for another second. Then she stepped back and let him in. That was how their first real date began. Not at the restaurant at her doorway with a cactus and two people who had spent the day replaying the same conversation from different angles. They went to a diner 6 blocks from the duplex. The kind of place that never closes, red vinyl booths, fluorescent lights, a jukebox in the corner that nobody had fed quarters in years, a laminated menu with coffee stains on the corners. Noah had eaten there maybe 40 times alone. It felt different with her across the table. They ordered. Coffee for him, water with lemon for her, eggs and toast for both of them, even though it was 7 in the evening, because neither of them had eaten properly all day. For the first few minutes, they talked around it. Her co-worker who had stolen her design concept. The family he'd helped that morning with a unit that had been making a sound he'd described to Claire as somewhere between a dying animal and a smoke detector having an existential crisis. She laughed at that. He noticed how her whole face changed when she laughed, not just her mouth, everything. Then she put her coffee cup down and looked at him directly. "Say what you came to say, Noah." He looked at the table, then back at her. "I handled last night badly." "You did," she agreed. "Simple. No cruelty in it. Just the truth. You told me something real, and I turned it into a logic problem." "Yes. I do that. When I get scared, I go logical. Because logic doesn't leave. Logic doesn't look at you one day and tell you that you're not enough." Claire was quiet, watching him. "Melissa did that for 3 years," he said. "She was never mean about it. She was actually very gentle about it, which almost made it worse. She'd say things like, 'Have you thought about going back to school? Or maybe management is more your speed.' Always framed as concern. Always sounding like she was looking out for me." He stopped. But what she was actually saying every time was that who I wasn't quite what she needed. "Noah, I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this because last night when you said you might leave something in me, the part that Melissa trained went straight to practical. Safe. Distant." He met her eyes. "And I need you to know that I know I did that, and that it wasn't about you." Claire was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that the waitress came by and refilled his coffee without either of them acknowledging her. "Ryan told me I was too focused on my career," she said finally. "He said it made me hard to be close to, that I always had one foot out the door chasing the next thing." She turned her water glass slowly in her hands. "He said it the week before he left me for a job opportunity in Denver. Without telling me he was considering it. Without a single conversation. He left for a job and told you that you were the one who couldn't commit. He left for a job and told me my ambition made intimacy impossible." She said it flat, and even the way you talk about something you've processed enough to say out loud, but that still costs you something. "So I moved to Austin, fresh start, and I told myself I would not let my career define me. I would be more present, more available. And then your company offered you Seattle. And then my company offered me Seattle." She gave a small, tired laugh. which I have been working toward for 5 years, which is genuinely the thing I have wanted more than almost anything professionally. She looked at him. And the timing is what it is. The timing is terrible. The timing is genuinely catastrophic, she agreed. And I don't know what to do with that. Noah set his fork down. I want you to stay, he said. I'm going to say it clearly because I didn't last night. I want you to stay. I want to find out what this is. He paused. And I also don't want you to stay because of me. I don't want to be the reason you look back in 5 years and wonder. She looked at him for a long time. That's a complicated thing to say. It's the true thing. Both of those things can't be equally true. Maybe not equally, but they're both real. He leaned forward slightly. What I can promise you is this: if you go, I'm not going to use the distance as an excuse to disappear. I've done that before. When something gets hard, I create space, and then I call the space practicality. And then one day, there's so much space that it just becomes absence. He shook his head. I'm not doing that again. Claire studied him. Not suspicious. More like someone reading something carefully because they want to understand every word before they respond. You're asking me to trust that, she said. I'm asking you to let me prove it. Which I know is a thing people say. I know it's easy to say across a table in a diner. He held her gaze. But I showed up tonight with a cactus and the truth. That's the best I've got right now. Something shifted in her face. Not dramatically. Just a small release of something she'd been holding. I have 3 days, she said. Then let's use them honestly. No pretending this isn't hard. No pretending we have answers we don't have. He paused. Let's spend the weekend actually talking. Actually being in the same room. And then you make the decision that's right for you. She was quiet again. Then she reached across the table and picked up her fork, and she speared a piece of toast, and she said, okay. Just okay. Like it was simple, even though both of them understood it wasn't. They ate. They talked. They stayed in that diner for 3 hours past the dinner rush into the late-night crowd, past the point where the jukebox got fed by a couple of teenagers who played 3 songs that were completely wrong for the moment, but somehow worked anyway. They talked about her family in Michigan and his in San Marcos. They talked about the kind of life she'd imagined at 22 and what it actually looked like at 29. They talked about his father, who had also been a technician plumbing, not HVAC, and who had worked with his hands his entire life, and who Noah had watched go to work every morning without complaint, without performance, without needing anyone to tell him his job mattered. He sounds like you, Claire said. He was better at it than me. He never doubted whether it was enough. You doubt that? Noah looked at her. Melissa made sure I did. Claire set her fork down. For what it's worth, she said carefully, I have never once thought your job was beneath you. I've thought the opposite, actually. You go make things work that have stopped working. You show up when it's 104 degrees and families are desperate. That's not nothing, Noah. That's not a small thing. He looked at her across the vinyl table in the fluorescent light of a diner that smelled like coffee and old grease, and something in him settled. Quiet and specific and real. They walked home at 10:30. The heat was still there, but softer than it had been, the city breathing more easily. At the porch they stopped. Not awkwardly. Comfortably, the way you stop somewhere you've been before, even when everything around it is new. He kissed her goodnight on the porch. Slower than the lake, more deliberate. Like a choice rather than a surrender. Inside, she leaned her back against the closed door and closed her eyes. She had 3 days. She had a decision that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with him. She had the thing she'd worked 5 years for, and the thing that had knocked on her door at midnight and been brave enough to walk into the lake. She didn't know yet what she was going to do, but for the first time in years, not knowing felt like the beginning of something instead of the end. The next morning came in at 6:47, and Claire was already awake, sitting on the porch with her first cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood come to life. She heard Noah's door before she saw him, the specific creak of the hinge she'd memorized without meaning to. And then he was there in his work clothes, thermos in hand, and he stopped when he saw her and said, "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," she said. "You work," he said. needlessly since he was in his uniform. Then he sat down in the other chair. His chair. The one that had been his chair for 11 months, and they drank their coffee in the early quiet, and it was exactly like every morning they'd ever had on this porch, and completely different from all of them simultaneously. "I've been thinking," she said, "about Seattle, about what you said last night, about proving things." She held her mug in both hands. "I want to believe you, Noah. I want to believe that this time the people involved are different, that the pattern breaks here." She looked at him. "I'm just not sure I know how to trust that." He nodded. "That's fair." "It doesn't feel fair. It feels like I'm punishing you for Ryan." "You're not punishing me. You're being careful. There's a difference." He said it the same way she'd said things to him without accusation, just as truth. "I spent 18 months punishing you for Melissa without realizing I was doing it. Being careful is better than that." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Come to my studio today, after work. I want to show you something." He didn't ask what. He just said he'd be there by 5. She spent the day at her desk, feeling the weight of the decision pressing against everything else. She had emails about Seattle logistics onboarding paperwork, apartment listings her would-be manager had helpfully forwarded. She had a portfolio review at 2 o'clock. She had a smaller project due Friday that suddenly felt both urgent and completely irrelevant. She had 68 hours left to answer. At 3:17 in the afternoon, while she was deep in a layout revision, her phone buzzed. Her company's HR department. She let it go to voicemail, listened to it with her door closed, and then sat very still at her desk for about 4 minutes. The Seattle regional director had resigned that morning. Unexpected departure. Personal reasons, details not disclosed. They needed her there in 10 days. Not 3 weeks. 10 days. The countdown had just moved. Noah arrived at her studio at 5:03, still in his work clothes, carrying 2 bottles of cold water, because it was still 96 degrees outside, and he was the kind of person who thought about those things. She met him at the door and immediately said, "They moved the timeline, 10 days. He went still. 10 days. As in 10 days from today. He processed that. She watched him process it, watched him do the thing she now recognized as his, tell the slight tightening around his eyes when he was running through implications. "Okay," he said carefully. "I need you to not go logical on me," she said. "I'm not going logical. I'm absorbing." He handed her one of the water bottles. "Show me what you wanted to show me." She led him into the main studio space. The room was large and open, drafting tables, flat files, 3 monitors on the main workstation, sketches pinned everywhere. But at the far wall was the installation she'd been building for 6 months. Hundreds of paper birds suspended on invisible wire at varying heights, each one hand-folded, each one a different shade of white or cream or gray. The effect in the right light was extraordinary, like a single exhaled breath caught mid-air. Noah stopped, genuinely stopped, feet planted, and looked at it. "Claire," he said. "The campaign is about architecture," she said. "Specifically about buildings that breathe. I wanted something that suggested motion without actually moving." She watched him look at it. "It took 5 months. Every bird is hand-folded. My hands looked like paper cuts for the first 2 months." He was quiet for a moment. "This is what you do," he said. "This is what I do. And Seattle wants you to lead an entire division, to apply this." He gestured at the wall, "at a national scale." "Yes." He turned and looked at her. Not with pity, not with resignation, with something she hadn't expected, which was clarity. "You have to go," he said. She felt the words hit, not painfully with weight, the weight of someone saying true things. "You built this," he said. "Every single piece of it by hand because you care about the work more than you care about being comfortable. You don't get opportunities like Seattle because you played it safe. You get opportunities like Seattle because you're the person who stayed up folding paper birds until your hands bled." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not going to be the reason you don't go." She looked at him for a long time. "What if I don't want to go? Do you?" She was quiet. "Claire." "I want both," she said. "I want the promotion, and I want to find out what this is." Her voice was steady, but not easy. "And I know those are not automatically compatible things." He crossed the studio floor and stood in front of her. Close. "Then we figure out whether they can be compatible. We don't pretend the choice isn't real. We don't make each other promises we can't keep. But we also don't just hand this thing over to logistics and geography. You make it sound simpler than it is." "I know it's not simple. I'm saying it's not over either." She looked up at him. "How are you this calm about this?" "I'm not calm," he said. "I'm terrified. But I've spent 2 years being terrified quietly, and all that got me was a broken apartment and a very efficient coffee routine." He held her gaze. "I'd rather be terrified out loud. With you." She put her forehead against his shoulder. He stayed completely still. She could feel him breathe. 10 days, she said. 10 days, he agreed. "What do we do with 10 days? We spend them honestly," he said. "Like I said at the diner, no performance, no pretending." They stood in the studio with the paper birds holding still around them and outside the window. Austin was still baking in the tail end of its worst summer in 30 years, and neither of them had any idea what the next week would cost them. But they stayed. That night, she did not go back to her apartment. They sat on the shared porch until 1 in the morning, and they talked, really talked, the kind of talking that costs something, where you say the things you've been keeping behind the polite version of yourself. She told him about the specific moment she realized Ryan was gone for good. Not the day he left, but 3 weeks later, when she found a coffee mug at the back of a cabinet with his name on it and felt nothing. Not grief. Nothing. Which she understood meant she had been grieving for much longer than she'd admitted. He told her about the night. The engagement ended how he'd driven to a gas station at 2 in the morning and sat in the parking lot for an hour because he didn't know what else to do with his body. "You just sat there," she said. "I bought a hot dog," he said. "From one of those rotating things. I don't even like hot dogs." She laughed. The real laugh, the full one. He looked at her laughing and thought, 10 days is not enough, but it is what it is, and whatever comes after this moment is real. The days that followed were not cinematic. They were ordinary and urgent and strange. He had work every morning. She had projects and logistics and the Seattle onboarding packets that kept arriving in her email like inevitability made digital. But every evening they were together at his place, or hers, cooking or ordering and talking or not talking. Once sitting through an entire terrible action movie that neither of them watched because they were talking the entire time and didn't notice until the credits rolled. On the 3rd day he came over with groceries and made dinner. Real dinner, not takeout. He was a better cook than he'd ever let on, which she told him, and he said he'd been holding that back strategically, and she threw a dish towel at him. They argued over whose playlist to put on while he cooked. She won because it was her kitchen. He complained about her music for 20 minutes while secretly agreeing with most of her selections. They ate at her kitchen table, surrounded by half-packed boxes she'd started filling, and the boxes made it real in a way the emails hadn't quite managed. "This is actually happening," she said. "It is," he agreed. "You're not going to do the thing where you make space until there's nothing left." "No," he said. "You promise." He looked at her across the table. "I promise. And I don't make promises lightly. I barely make them at all anymore." A beat. "Which you know." She nodded. She did know. "I'll call when I say I'll call," he said. "I'll come when we make a plan. And when it's hard, I'll say it's hard, instead of saying everything is fine and then disappearing for 2 weeks." He picked up his fork. "That's what I can give you. Consistency. Honesty. Showing up." "That's actually everything," she said quietly. "It should be the minimum," he said. "It's not always." On the 5th evening, 6 days before her flight, they'd booked a flight. The boxes were multiplying. The studio was being carefully dismantled. The paper birds were wrapped in tissue and tucked into crates. They had their first real argument. It started over something small. A comment he made about her supervisor that she took more personally than he'd intended. And then it became about her habit of not telling him things until she'd fully processed them herself. which he said made him feel like a footnote instead of a person she was in something with, and she said that was not fair, and he said it was completely fair, and for about 20 minutes they were genuinely specifically angry at each other. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet. Just sat down mid-argument on the floor. He stared at her. "What are you doing?" "I need a minute," she said. He looked at her for a second. Then he sat down on the floor too, across from her back against the opposite cabinet. They sat there for a while. "I do that," she said finally. "The processing alone thing. It's not about keeping you out. It's about not bringing you chaos before I know what the chaos is." "I can handle chaos," he said. "I fix things for a living. Broken systems are my specialty." She almost smiled. "This isn't a broken system." "No, it's just us, which is more complicated." He leaned his head back against the cabinet. "I don't need you to have it figured out before you tell me things. I just need to be in the room while you figure it out." She thought about that. "That's actually reasonable?" "I have occasional moments of reasonable. Don't push it," she said. His own words from the lake returned. He looked at her. Something between them released. Not the whole argument, but the tension underneath it. The real fear underneath the argument, which was not about her supervisor or his feelings, but about whether two people with their specific histories were capable of doing this differently than they'd done it before. "We're going to argue," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "And neither of us is going to handle it perfectly every time." "Definitely not. But we're going to stay in the room." She held his gaze. "We're going to stay in the room." They got up off the floor. They finished the argument quieter and more honestly. They did the dishes together, which involved more negotiation than the dishes strictly required. She put the paper birds back in their tissue, and he helped her seal the crates, and they wrote fragile on the sides in black marker. And she said that word was doing a lot of work in this apartment right now, and he said, yeah, it really was. At Ni 47 that evening, 3 days before her flight, her phone rang. The ringtone she'd assigned to her mother. She answered it in the other room, and he sat at the kitchen table and could hear without trying to the specific rhythm of a conversation that was about him. She didn't say his name, but she said things that were about him. About this, about what happened when a person found something real at exactly the wrong moment. She came back into the kitchen 10 minutes later and sat down across from him. "My mother wants to know if you're a good person," she said. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you brought me a cactus as an apology, and she said that was either very charming or deeply alarming, and she wasn't sure which." He nodded. "Both, probably." "Both," she agreed. She looked at him across the table. Her expression was the same one she'd had at the lake, that edge between wanting and being terrified. Except tonight, she wasn't pulling back from it. "I don't want to go," she said. "I want to go and I don't want to go, and both of those things are completely true at the same time." "I know," he said. "And there's no version of this that isn't hard." "No." "So we're choosing hard on purpose," she said. "We're choosing real on purpose," he said. "Hard is just part of the deal." She reached across the table, put her hand over his. They sat there in her kitchen in the late heat, surrounded by boxes and paper birds, and the specific weight of a situation that had no easy answer. 3 days left. Neither of them said that out loud. They didn't need to. It was in the room with them, the same way it had been in the room for a week, patient and certain, and completely unmoved by how much either of them might prefer it to be otherwise. What they'd found at the lake in the middle of the night hadn't been a love story, in the way that love stories usually present themselves. It hadn't been simple or frictionless or choreographed. It had been two people showing up imperfectly in the middle of a situation that kept getting harder. Choosing honesty when the easier thing was available. Staying in the room when leaving would have been the safe choice. That was the thing. Neither of them could quite articulate yet, but both of them understood in a way that bypassed words. The midnight swim had forced them to stop pretending. Everything since the dinner, the cactus, the studio, the kitchen floor, the boxes, the 3 days on a clock they hadn't set, was the actual story. And the actual story was only just beginning. 3 days left became 2 days left, became 1 day left, and the boxes in Claire's apartment multiplied the way boxes always do. You pack what you think is everything, and then you open a cabinet, and there's another entire life hiding behind the door. Noah was there every evening. That was the deal they hadn't formally made, but were both keeping anyway. He'd come over after work still carrying the smell of heat and machinery, and they'd eat whatever was available, take out crackers and cheese. Once a very ambitious pasta situation that required 3 trips to the cabinet because Claire had already packed the colander, and they'd pack boxes and talk and argue about what needed bubble wrap versus what could survive loose in a moving crate. It was domestic in a way that neither of them had expected. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just 2 people in a small kitchen making decisions about who got the mixing bowls. "You're taking both cutting boards," he said on the second-to-last evening, holding one up. "I need both cutting boards." No one needs 2 cutting boards. One is for meat and one is for everything else. That is not a rule I recognize. It is absolutely a rule. She took it from him and put it in the box. "You can get your own cutting board. You'll be fine." He looked at her. She looked at him. Then she put down the tape gun and said quietly, "I'm not ready." He didn't pretend not to understand what she meant. He didn't redirect to the cutting boards. He just said, "I know. I keep waking up at 3 in the morning," she said. "And for about 4 seconds, I forget it's real. And then I remember." She pressed her hands flat on the kitchen counter. "I have wanted this job for 5 years. I have worked for this job. And I cannot figure out why it feels like losing something instead of winning something." "Because it is both," he said. "At the same time. That's allowed." She looked at him. "When did you get wise?" "About 48 hours ago. I'm still getting used to it." She almost smiled. "Noah." "Yeah. Don't you dare disappear on me." "I won't. If you disappear, if this becomes one of those things where the distance just turns into absence, and we pretend that's natural, I will never forgive you. Not for leaving. For making me believe you wouldn't." He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her. "I know," he said. "And I know saying I won't disappear is exactly what someone who is going to disappear would also say. I know you have no reason to believe me, except that I'm standing here telling you." He held her gaze. "So watch what I do. Not what I say. Watch what I do." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she put her forehead against his chest, and he put his arms around her, and they stood there in her half-packed kitchen, and didn't say anything else for a while. That was 11:14 on the night before her last full day. The last full day arrived on a Wednesday that felt like it had too much in it for one calendar square. Claire had a final walkthrough with her landlord at 9 in the morning. Noah had 4 jobs, 2 residential, 1 commercial unit that had been giving him trouble for a week. 1 emergency call that came in at 7 and pushed everything else back by 90 minutes. They texted back and forth across the hours, him sending updates in the clipped shorthand of someone who texts with one thumb while walking to a truck, her sending voice memos because typing felt too slow for what she was trying to say. At 3 in the afternoon, her voice memo said, "I keep looking at the walls where things used to hang." He texted back, "I kept the hook you left on my side of the porch. For your coat. I didn't take it down. Just so you know." She didn't respond to that for 11 minutes. Then she sent a single word. "Good." He finished his last job at 4:47, drove back to the duplex, showered in under 6 minutes, and knocked on her door at 5:15. She opened it, looking like someone who had been holding something heavy all day, and was very close to setting it down. "Come in," she said. "I need to show you something before the light changes." He followed her to the main room where the last large crate sat open, the one with the paper birds. She had kept it for last on purpose, he understood. You don't pack the thing that matters most first. You leave it because as long as it's still there, some part of the room is still yours. She lifted the tissue paper on the top layer and showed him the birds packed inside each one, nested separately, impossibly fragile, impossibly careful. "I made the first one in January," she said. "When the project brief came in. I didn't know how many I'd need. I just started." She touched one gently. "By March, I had 200. By April, I stopped counting." Noah stood beside her and looked at the box. What were you thinking about when you made them? She considered that. I was thinking about things that look delicate, but aren't. Things that look like they shouldn't survive, but do. She folded the tissue back over them carefully. I was thinking about myself probably, but I didn't realize that until much later. He reached over and sealed the crate. He wrote fragile on the top in the black marker that had been living on her counter for a week, and then below it, without thinking too hard about it, he wrote, and worth it. She read that, looked at him, didn't say anything. He capped the marker. Dinner, he said. What do you want? Something that doesn't require decisions. I'll handle it. He ordered from the Thai place 3 blocks over that she had introduced him to in November, and they ate on the floor because she'd already broken down the table, and they talked about everything except tomorrow, which was a mutual unspoken agreement that both of them observed until 9:43 when she broke it. Noah. Yeah. I'm not flying. She said it quietly, like she'd been carrying it all day and finally put it on the floor between them. He went very still. What? I canceled the flight this morning, after the landlord left. She looked at him. I want to drive. I've been thinking about it for days, and I keep coming back to the same thing. I've been making this decision alone in my head with my laptop, my phone, and 3 days of logistics. And I don't want to arrive in Seattle having already made it entirely alone. She paused. I want you to come with me. He stared at her. Not to move, she said quickly. Not to make any permanent decision. I want you to drive it with me. See the city. See the life I'm choosing. She held his gaze. And then decide with real information, not just hypotheticals, whether you can imagine being part of it someday. The room was very quiet. Claire, he started. I know you have work. I have 4 days off next week. I already checked. He said it before he'd consciously decided to say it. I checked 2 days ago, actually. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to push. She blinked. You already checked. I already checked. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, You would have just let me fly. If that's what you wanted, he said. Yes. But you checked. But I checked. Her expression did something complicated. You are the most infuriating person, she said. Because I checked my calendar. Because you checked your calendar and then said nothing, and were going to just let me figure it out. She shook her head. That's either very considerate or extremely annoying, and I genuinely cannot decide which. Both probably. Both, she agreed. Then softly, so you'll come. When do we leave? He said. She exhaled. And in that exhale was 2 weeks of wait and the paper birds in their crate and the hook on the porch. He hadn't taken down, and a cactus she'd moved to the windowsill where it was technically getting the best light in the apartment. Tomorrow morning, she said. 6 a.m. He nodded. I'll be ready. That night, he went back to his apartment and repacked his bag twice and slept 4 hours and was on the porch at 5:52 with 2 cups of coffee when she came out at 5:58 with her last bag over her shoulder and stopped when she saw him already there. You made coffee, she said. Seemed like the right call. She took the cup, looked at him over the rim. You ready for this? Absolutely not, he said cheerfully. Let's go. They pulled out of Austin at 6:11 in the morning, in her Subaru 2 bags in the back seat, 1 crate of paper, birds in the trunk that Noah had triple-checked was secured, and the particular silence of 2 people who are about to find out something important about each other. For the first hour, they talked easily, the way they'd always talked on the porch, comfortable and circular jumping subjects, without needing transitions. But somewhere around the 2nd hour in the stretch of highway where Texas starts to feel genuinely enormous, and there's nothing to look at but sky. The conversation went somewhere new. Tell me something you've never told anyone, she said. He was quiet for a moment. When the engagement ended, I almost quit HVAC. She looked at him. Quit. I had this idea that if I changed everything external career city routine, I could outrun the feeling. He kept his eyes on the road. I got as far as looking up other trades. Spent about a week researching electrician certification programs. What stopped you? A job. Elderly woman living alone. August heat unit completely dead. I showed up, I fixed it, and she made me iced tea and told me her husband had fixed things too before he passed. Said there was something about a person who showed up and made broken things work. He paused. I drove home and didn't look at the electrician programs again. Claire was quiet for a moment. She gave you your reason back. She gave me my reason back, he agreed. A stranger with iced tea. That's the most Noah Carter sentence I've ever heard. He glanced at her. How so? The thing that saved you wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. It was just someone being human to you at the right moment. She looked out the window. That's how you operate. You save people, and you get saved by the same ordinary thing. He sat with that. The highway kept going. Texas kept being enormous. What about you? He said. Something you've never told anyone. She didn't hesitate. I almost took a job in Denver. He turned to look at her. When, 2 months after Ryan left, his company reached out, actually not to Ryan, to me. They'd seen my portfolio somewhere, and they were interested in a mid-level position. She kept her eyes ahead. I didn't tell anyone because I just told everyone I was fine. I was building a new life. Austin was a fresh start. She shook her head. The truth was, I spent 2 weeks seriously considering following him. Not to be with him. Just because staying felt like admitting the move had been a mistake, and I didn't know how to admit that yet. You didn't take it. I didn't take it, but it was close. She glanced at him. I stayed because the Austin opportunity came up, and it was objectively better. Not because I had any particular clarity about my life. She paused. And then 3 weeks later you knocked on my door to introduce yourself and asked to borrow coffee filters. He remembered that. He had been catastrophically underprepared for moving in terms of supplies. You gave me the whole box, he said. I had 2 boxes. It seemed ridiculous to give you 4 filters. You also gave me a plant. The plant needed more sun than I had. It was a practical decision. You gave me a plant and a box of coffee filters the week I moved in, and I remember thinking, whoever this woman is, she's probably a lot. She laughed. The real one. And I was correct. You are a lot. He let the timing settle. It's one of my favorite things about you. She went quiet in the way she did when something landed, and she was absorbing it. They crossed into New Mexico in the early afternoon, stopped at a gas station that had possibly existed since the highway was built, at sandwiches from a cooler Claire had packed with the specific efficiency of someone who plans ahead, and argued about whether to take a slightly longer route through a town Noah had been to once as a kid and half remembered as interesting. How interesting, she said. 7 out of 10 interesting. That's not a compelling pitch. It has a diner that serves breakfast all day. Now you're pitching. They took the longer route. The diner delivered. They sat in a booth for 45 minutes and ate eggs at 2:30 in the afternoon, and the waitress refilled their coffee 4 times without being asked, which both of them agreed was the mark of a genuinely good diner. Outside the diner, in the parking lot of a town, neither of them could have found on a map. Noah stopped walking and turned to her. I need to say something. She stopped, something in his tone. Okay. I've been thinking about what you said in the studio, about wanting both things, the promotion and this. He looked at her steadily. I want both things too. I'm not going to pretend this is simple. Long distance is hard. I've seen it fail people I care about. The communication collapses, the visits get fewer, and then one day you're just 2 people who used to mean something to each other. He paused. I'm telling you that because I think you deserve honesty over comfort. She was very still. That sounds like a goodbye. It's the opposite, he said. I'm telling you all the ways it can go wrong because I want us to name them now before they happen, so that when they happen, we're not surprised. We don't get to pretend we didn't see it coming. He held her gaze. I am choosing this with full information, and I need you to do the same. She looked at him for a long time. The parking lot was quiet. Heat off the asphalt. A car going past on the highway behind them. That is the most adult thing anyone has ever said to me, she said finally. I'm trying something new. It's working, she said. God, it's working, and it's terrifying. They drove through the afternoon and into the early evening, and somewhere in the second half of Utah, The conversation got quieter and easier, the way a good day settles into itself. She drove and he navigated, and twice the navigation was wrong, and they argued about whose fault that was, which was unambiguously the GPS, but they argued about it anyway because that was more entertaining. They stopped at a motel outside of a small Utah city at 8:47 in the evening, the kind of place that is perfectly clean and perfectly characterless, and the air conditioner in the room made a sound Noah identified immediately as a refrigerant issue. "Don't," she said. "Don't what?" "Don't look at it like that. We are not here so you can fix the motel air conditioner. It's a simple fix, 15 minutes. Noah. It's bothering me. It's not bothering me. It's going to bother you at 2 in the morning. She looked at him. He looked at the air conditioner. She sighed. "If you fix it, I'm getting the bathroom first." Deal. He fixed it in 22 minutes, which he considered close enough to 15. She came out of the bathroom in time to watch him closing the back panel, and she sat on the edge of the bed and watched him and said, "I've been thinking." "Good time for it," he said, replacing the last screw. "You fix things because they need fixing, not because anyone asks, not because you're getting credit." She watched him stand up and wipe his hands on a shop rag he'd had in his bag. "That's who you are, consistently, not just with me." She paused. "Ryan told me I was too focused on work to be present. But you work all day on someone else's problem, and then you come home and fix Eleanor's smoke detector and check your calendar in secret and write worth it on a crate of paper birds." She shook her head. "Those are not the actions of someone who's not present." He sat down on the other side of the bed. "I've had good examples. My dad." "I know, but it's not just your dad, it's you." She looked at him. "I need you to know that I see that, because I don't think Melissa ever saw it. And I think part of why you doubt yourself is because the person who was supposed to see you didn't." The room was very quiet. "Claire," he said, "you don't have to say anything." "I want to say something." "Okay. The night you knocked on my door," he said slowly. "I was lying in the dark, telling myself that keeping distance from you was the smart choice, the responsible choice." He looked at her. "I had convinced myself that what I'd built the small life, the managed distance, was wisdom, that I'd learned something from Melissa." He shook his head. "What I'd actually learned was how to protect myself so well that nothing could get in, including the things I actually wanted." She held his gaze. "You getting in," he said, "has been the most inconvenient and most important thing that's happened to me in years." She smiled. "The soft one. The real one." "Inconvenient." "Profoundly," he said. "I had a very functional system." "Your system was terrible." "It was efficient." "Efficiency is not the same as living." "Someone told me that recently," he said. "On a porch, in a heat wave." She reached over and turned off the lamp on her side. "Sleep," she said. "We have another 12 hours of driving tomorrow, and I am not doing it on 5 hours of rest. You went to bed first last night, too. I am a morning person. This is known information about me. It's 9:30. Sleep, Noah." He turned off his lamp. The room went dark except for the thin line of light under the door. The air conditioner ran quietly. Fixed. "Hey," he said to the dark. "What?" "I'm glad you knocked." A pause. "Me too," she said. "Now sleep." He did. They arrived in Seattle on a Thursday afternoon. 2 days in one dramatically overpacked motel. Complimentary breakfast after leaving Austin, and the city received them in the way. Seattle often receives people with a gray sky that somehow felt like a greeting rather than a warning, the kind of diffuse light that makes everything look like a photograph someone took on purpose. He watched Claire's face as they crossed into the city, watched her sit up straighter, watched her eyes move differently, reading the streets, reading the buildings, reading the potential of the place she'd chosen. He hadn't seen her look like that before. Certain. Hungry in a specific and professional way, the way you look at a thing you've been building toward and can finally see clearly. It was he understood the same face he made when he got to a job site and immediately saw what needed doing. They found her new apartment building at 3:20 in the afternoon. Her company had arranged a furnished short-term rental, a practical clean space that had none of her, yet none of the paper birds, or the pinned sketches, or the design books stacked horizontally, because there was never enough shelf space. It smelled like fresh paint and other people's cleaning products. She stood in the middle of the living room and turned slowly. "It'll be yours in about a week," he said. "It doesn't feel like anything yet." "That's what furniture does. Furniture makes it yours." He looked around. "You need a plant." She turned to him. "You gave me a plant." "The one you gave me, which you gave me because you had too much sun." He looked at her. "You could use more sun in here." She stared at him. "Are you suggesting I take my own plant back?" "I'm suggesting you've earned it." She laughed, shook her head, looked around the apartment that didn't feel like hers yet. "It's going to be okay," he said. She turned to him. "You don't know that." "No," he agreed. "But I'm going to say it anyway because I believe it, and I think you need to hear it from someone who's not inside your head." He crossed to where she was standing. "You are the most capable person I have ever watched work. You fold paper birds for 5 months by hand because the quality matters to you. You drove 2,000 miles instead of flying because the process matters to you." He looked at her. "Seattle is not going to be too much for you. Seattle is going to have to keep up with you." She put both hands on his chest, looked up at him. "4 days," she said. "You have 4 days before you have to fly back. I know. We should use them. We should absolutely use them." She kissed him. There in the empty apartment that didn't feel like hers yet, with the gray Seattle light coming through the windows and 2,000 miles of highway behind them and everything uncertain ahead. She kissed him and he kissed her back, and it was not the careful exploratory kiss from the lake or the deliberate goodnight kiss from the porch. It was the kiss of two people who had chosen each other on purpose, with full information, eyes open. They spent the 4 days the way you spend time, when you know it's finite and precious, and you don't want to perform it, but you also don't want to waste it. They walked the city. He carried things, and she directed where they went, and he noticed everything: the neighborhoods, the businesses, the infrastructure of a place where people lived real lives. He noticed the company names on the buildings in the design district. He noticed the coffee was good. He noticed that Claire moved through the city like she already knew where she was going, even when she didn't, because confidence of that particular variety is not about knowing the streets, it's about trusting your own navigation. On the 3rd day, they visited her new office. The company had offered a tour as part of onboarding, and she'd asked if she could bring someone, and they'd said of course. He walked through her future workspace beside her open floor plan, large windows, a studio space at the back that made her go quiet in the way she went quiet when she saw the lake for the first time. "This is where you're going to work," he said. "Yes," she said. "This is where the next thing gets built." "Yes." He looked at the studio space, at the windows, at the walls that didn't have her work on them yet, but would. "This is worth it," he said. "I want to be very clear about that. This is worth it." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in a way that was not quite crying, but was the thing before it. "Noah, I mean it. Everything you did to get here, the 5 years, the paper birds, the 300 mornings on a shared porch while you figured out how to start over, it led here. That means something." He held her gaze. "And it doesn't mean less because I'm going to be in Austin for a while. Those two things can both be true." She pressed her lips together, nodded once, composed herself with the specific efficiency of someone who has learned to do that in professional spaces. "Thank you," she said, "for coming. Thank you for asking." He paused. "And for not flying." She smiled. The drive was better. The drive was significantly better. He flew back to Austin on a Sunday morning, and she stood at the curb outside her building and watched the rideshare pull away, and she did not cry until she was back inside. And then she cried for about 7 minutes with her back against the door, and then she washed her face, made coffee, and opened her laptop. She had work to do. He landed in Austin at 2:15 in the afternoon, picked up his truck from long-term parking, and drove back to the duplex. The porch was quiet. Both chairs. The hook on his side of the wall that he hadn't taken down. He went inside. His apartment smelled like his apartment, familiar and specific, and entirely his. The cactus was on the windowsill where Claire had left her version of it, except this was his cactus, the one she'd called an apology in plant form. He looked at it for a moment. Then he texted her, "Landed. Everything okay?" She responded in 4 seconds. Seconds, good. "Working. Text me tonight." He responded 7. She sent back 7. He put his phone down and looked around his apartment. The same apartment that had felt small and managed and safe for 18 months. The same ceiling fan. The same broken air conditioner he'd finally gotten around to fixing himself because fixing it for himself had felt too much like settling in, and now he understood that was exactly the wrong way to think about it. He picked up his phone again. 7 it is, he sent. Then after a pause added, "I checked the Seattle HVAC companies on the drive back through the city. Just so you know. Not making any decisions. Just checking." 3 minutes of silence. Then her response. "Just checking." 2 words. But they carried everything. He set his phone on the counter, sat down at his kitchen table, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt the specific particular quality of missing someone without needing to make that feeling go away. He sat with it. Let it be real. Let it mean what it meant. Outside Austin was starting to cool toward evening. The heat wave finally breaking after weeks of holding the city in its grip. Through his window he could hear the neighborhood exhaling. Somewhere a kid was laughing. A car radio. The distant sound of an air conditioner running someone else's working the way it was supposed to. I had work tomorrow. He had a life here that was real and specific and his. He had a customer list and coworkers and a landlord who needed a conversation about lease terms. He also had 7 o'clock. That was enough. He was beginning to understand exactly enough to start with. The first month was manageable. That was the word Noah used when his coworker Marcus asked how the long-distance thing was going. Manageable. And Marcus had looked at him with the specific expression of someone who knows that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting and has decided not to say so out loud. They called every night at 7. Not always for long. Sometimes 40 minutes. Sometimes 2 hours. Once for 11 minutes, because Claire had a presentation at 6 the next morning, and Noah could hear the exhaustion in her voice from the first word she said, and told her to go to sleep. And she argued for about 90 seconds before admitting he was right. But every night at 7, one of them called. That was the agreement they'd made without formally calling it an agreement, which was somehow more binding than if they'd written it down. He told her about his jobs. The residential units, the commercial buildings, the one emergency call on a Thursday night that took him into a restaurant kitchen at 10 p.m. because the refrigeration system had failed, and they had a full house the next day. She told him about her new team, 5 designers, all talented, all slightly wary of the new person who had arrived as their lead, with 2 years less seniority than any of them had expected. She was navigating that carefully, she said, not trying to prove herself with authority. Trying to prove herself with work. "It's like being the new kid," she said one evening around week 3. "Except the stakes are real and nobody's passing notes." "You've handled worse," he said. "I've handled different. This is its own particular thing." He heard her moving around the sound of her kitchen, the specific acoustics of the Seattle apartment he'd spent 4 days in and could map from memory. "My supervisor took credit for a campaign concept today, in a meeting, in front of 7 people. Noah went very still. "He did what?" "It was my concept. I presented it to him 2 weeks ago in a one-on-one. He spent the meeting presenting it as something the team had developed under his direction." Her voice was controlled. Practiced. The voice of someone who had decided not to let the anger win. He changed 2 words, and 2 words only. "Claire. I'm handling it," she said. "I've been documenting everything. Dates, emails, original files with the creation timestamps. I'm not doing anything yet. I'm building the record first." "That's smart." "It's necessary." A pause. "It's also exhausting. I came here to do the work, not to spend half my energy managing someone else's ego." "I know." He said it simply without trying to fix it. "I know." She was quiet for a moment, then softer. "How's Eleanor?" "Good. Fixed her porch light last week. She made me oatmeal cookies. Of course she did. He could hear the smile. She completely loves you. She loves anyone who shows up without complaining about it. That is a very specific kind of love, and you are dramatically underselling how rare it is. The calls were the anchor. When a flight got delayed in week 5, and Noah missed a planned weekend visit weather in Dallas, nothing anyone could control. 2 hours on a plastic airport chair, watching a departure board that kept pushing the time back. The call that night ran until midnight. At one point, Claire said quietly, and without decoration, "I really needed you to be here tonight." And Noah said, "Tell me what happened." And she did. All of it. The supervisor situation getting worse, a junior designer on her team who was burning out and didn't know how to say it, a phone call with her mother that had left her more tired than it should have. He listened. He didn't try to solve everything. He just stayed on the line, and that was the night he fully understood that showing up on the phone done right was its own form of presence. Week 6 brought the first real fight. The way first real fights always come, not from the thing that starts them. Claire mentioned casually that a colleague had invited her to a design gallery opening on Saturday. Noah said also casually, "Who else is going?" Something in the way he said it landed with a weight he hadn't intended, and she heard it immediately. "Are you asking because you actually want to know?" she said, her voice going careful, "or because you're keeping track of my social life from 2,000 miles away?" "I'm asking because I'm interested in what you're doing." "You're asking because you're worried. Those are not the same thing, and I need you to know the difference." "Claire, I didn't mean, I am not Ryan." She said it quietly, and it hit like something solid. "I am not at a gallery opening looking for reasons not to come back. There is no one else, and I need you to be able to say that to yourself without asking me to prove it every time I go somewhere." He went quiet. Long enough that she said his name once, checking. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry. That was my fear talking, and I put it on you." She exhaled. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too." "Then say that. When you're scared, say it. Don't ask me who I'm going to a gallery with." "Okay." He meant it. "Okay." They stayed on the phone for another hour after that. Not because they needed to resolve anything further, but because getting off the line too soon after a fight felt like retreating, and both of them had agreed on the floor of her Austin kitchen to stay in the room. Hanging up was the phone equivalent of leaving the room, so they stayed. When they finally said goodnight, she said, "We're going to be okay." "I know," he said. "Say it like you mean it." "We're going to be okay," he said more slowly, and this time he did mean it entirely. The 6-week visit happened in late October. Noah flew in on a Friday evening, and she was at the airport, which she'd said she might not be able to manage because of a meeting that might run long. And when he came through the arrival's door and saw her standing there with her coat on and her arms crossed against the chill, something in his chest did the specific thing it had been doing since the lake. He walked straight to her. She uncrossed her arms. He pulled her in and held on, and she pressed her face against his shoulder, and for about 30 seconds, neither of them said anything because there was nothing that needed saying. Then she said into his jacket, "Your flight was 18 minutes late. Weather over Nevada." "I was watching the tracker." "I know you were." He pulled back enough to look at her. "You look tired." "I look great, actually." "You look great and tired." "That's better." She touched his face briefly, a specific private gesture, and then stepped back. "Come on, I made dinner. Real dinner, not takeout." "You cooked?" "I have been cooking. I've had to learn skills to compensate for the absence of a person who shows up with Thai food." "That's the most flattering thing you've ever said to me." She led him to the car, and he noticed without saying anything that she looked different here than she had in Austin. Not better or worse. Different in the way that a person looks when they are in the place they're supposed to be, a particular kind of ease that doesn't mean happy exactly. It means fitting. It means belonging somewhere in a way that is specific to them. He had made peace with that on the plane ride over. More or less. The weekend was 4 days. He'd stretched the visit by taking Monday off, and they spent it the way they'd spent the drive to Seattle, without performance. They went to a market on Saturday morning and argued about cheese. They went to her office on Saturday afternoon because she had a deadline she couldn't fully ignore, and he sat in the studio space with a book he didn't read because looking around the room was more interesting. Her paper birds were up on one wall, not all of them, a selection arranged differently than the Austin installation adapted to the new space. He looked at them for a long time. On Sunday evening over dinner, she'd made genuinely good pasta, which she accepted his compliment on with more pride than she would have admitted to. She said, "Greg took credit for another piece." Noah set his fork down. "Same thing as before. Worse. This time it was in front of the senior team. He presented the campaign I'd been building for 6 weeks as a collaborative effort that emerged from his direction of the division." She kept eating calmly, which he recognized as the controlled version of furious. "There were 2 junior designers in that room who worked on that campaign with me directly, who are now wondering whether their work matters." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to the senior VP on Tuesday." She said it like it was already decided which it was. "I have the documentation. I have the original files. I have the email thread where I pitched it to Greg 3 days before he presented it. I have timestamps on everything." She met his eyes across the table. "I'm not going for revenge. I'm going for correction. And I'm asking for fair credit for the 2 junior designers as well, because they're the ones who can least afford this." He looked at her for a moment. "You're going to protect them first. They're 24 and 26. They moved across the country for this. They deserve to see their names on their own work." She was steady, completely steady. "I have enough runway to take the risk. They don't." He thought about what to say and decided the most honest thing was the simplest thing. "I am genuinely proud of you." She looked at him. "You are? What you just described it would be easier to protect yourself and let the junior people figure it out. The fact that that's not even the version you're considering." He shook his head. "That's character, Claire. That's who you actually are." She was quiet for a moment. Something in her face shifted, not dramatically, but in the way that a person shifts when they're absorbing something they needed to hear. "Ryan used to say my ambition made me cold," she said. "Ryan was wrong," Noah said. "What you just described is the opposite of cold." She reached across this table and touched his hand briefly. Then she went back to her pasta. He went back to his. Outside the Seattle window, the city did its evening thing, lights, movement, rain starting to build on the glass. "I checked the job listings again," he said. She looked up. "And there's a commercial company I applied to, Exploratory. I haven't heard back. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to make it a thing before it was a thing." She put her fork down. "Noah. It's not a decision, it's an application. Those are different." "Are they?" "Yes." He held her gaze. "I'm not going to move to Seattle because I can't handle the distance. If I move, it'll be because the opportunity is right for me professionally, and the timing is right for both of us." He paused. "But I also couldn't sit in Austin pretending I wasn't thinking about it. That felt like the old version of me, the one who doesn't say things." She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he could track what she was working through. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. Okay, tell me about the company." He told her. Commercial and industrial, excellent reputation, better pay structure than what he had in Austin. Training pathway toward project management, the kind of position where the work itself was a step forward rather than a lateral move. She asked questions, real ones, specific ones, the way she approached everything that mattered. Not leading him anywhere, just understanding. "That sounds right for you," she said when he finished. "It sounds interesting," he said carefully. "I'm not going to let feelings make a professional decision. Not in either direction. Not toward Seattle because of me," she said. "And not away from Seattle because of pride," he said. She held his gaze. "What does that mean?" He set his fork down. "Properly. The way you set things down when you're about to say something that costs you something." I've been avoiding thinking seriously about this because I was afraid of what people would think. That I followed a woman across the country. That I gave something up. That it would look like I made myself smaller. He shook his head. "Which is ridiculous," she said. "Ridiculous," he agreed. And also, exactly the thing I needed to name before it made a decision for me. She was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, she said. I would never think that. I would never see it that way. I know, he said. But I was afraid someone would. My coworkers, my dad, people with opinions. He looked at her. And I was letting that fear run in the background without admitting it. And now you're admitting it. And now I'm admitting it. He picked his fork back up. New habit. She watched him for another moment. Then she said quietly, I want you here. I want you to know that. Not because I can't do this alone, I can do this alone. But because this is better. She gestured vaguely at the table, the room. This, whatever this is, it's better. It is, he agreed simply. He flew back to Austin on Tuesday morning. She texted him at 9:17. Meeting with VP went well. Full documentation accepted. Greg has a meeting with HR this afternoon. Both designers will have their names restored to the campaign. He was on a job site when the text came in, and he read it standing next to a commercial unit on a roof in the Austin October sun, and he felt something sharp and specific and good. He texted back, I knew exactly how that was going to go. She sent back, you could not have known that. He sent, I know who you are. I knew. She didn't respond for 4 minutes. Then, stop making me emotional at work. He put his phone away and went back to the unit, and he was smiling in a way that Marcus noticed from across the roof and chose wisely to not comment on. The months built on each other the way months do not, in a straight line, not cleanly, but accumulating. November brought a visit from her to Austin the first time she'd been back since leaving, and she stood on the old porch and looked at the hook on Noah's side of the wall and said, You really didn't take it down. I said I wouldn't. I know, She touched it briefly. I didn't know if you meant it. I always mean things I say, he said. The problem is, I used to not say enough things. He paused. I'm working on the ratio. She smiled. How's the ratio coming? Improved. Still a work in progress. They knocked on Eleanor's door. Eleanor opened it, looked at Claire, and immediately pulled her into a hug that lasted long enough to be genuinely touching, and then looked at Noah over Claire's shoulder with an expression that said clearly without words, Don't you dare let this one go, and Noah gave her the small nod that said he had received the message. Eleanor made them tea. They sat in her living room for an hour and listened to her talk about her late husband Gerald, who had fixed things the way Noah fixed things, not because anyone asked, but because he noticed. That's how I knew he was a good man, Eleanor said, looking at Noah with her sharp, warm eyes. He fixed things before I had to ask. Gerald was like that. You're like that. Noah looked at his hands. Thank you, Eleanor. I'm not flattering you, she said briskly. I'm observing. There's a difference. She looked at Claire. You found a good one. I know, Claire said. She didn't look at Noah when she said it, which somehow made it more real. December arrived with the specific difficulty that neither of them had fully anticipated, which was the holidays. The question of whose family, whose city, whose tradition. These were the negotiations that long-distance relationships arrive at, and that reveal more about the people having them than almost any other conversation. They had the negotiation at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday in early December, and it was one of the harder ones. His family was in San Marcos. Hers was in Michigan. The math didn't work cleanly in either direction. We can't be in 3 places, she said. 2 places, he corrected. 3. Your family, my family, and with each other. He was quiet for a moment. What if we do 1 family each and meet up for New Year's? That means we don't spend Christmas together. That means we don't spend Christmas together, he agreed. This year. She absorbed that. This year. There will be other years. She was quiet for a long moment. You're sure about that? I'm sure about that. He said it without hesitation. That's not optimism. That's a statement of intent. She exhaled. Okay. My family for Christmas. Your family for Thanksgiving. I already told my mom we'd figure it out. She'll be fine. She might not be fine. She'll say she's fine. That's close enough. Claire laughed at that. That's actually not the same thing. No, but it's my mother and I understand her particular fine. A pause. Will you come to San Marcos for Thanksgiving, just for 2 days? My dad makes turkey. That is genuinely the best thing I've ever eaten, and I say that as someone who regularly eats at very good diners. She was quiet. 2 days. 2 days. You fly in Wednesday, fly out Friday. My family will be aggressively welcoming, and my dad will ask you approximately one question about your job, and then spend the rest of the time showing you the truck he's been restoring in the garage. What kind of truck? 1967 F100. It's beautiful. He's been working on it for 4 years. Okay, she said. I'll come for Thanksgiving. Yeah. Yeah. A smile in her voice. And Noah. Yeah. The statement of intent. Other years. She paused. I'm holding you to that. I know you are. You are, he said. That's why I said it. Thanksgiving was everything he'd promised. His mother was aggressively welcoming in the specific way of a woman who had waited 18 months to meet someone. Her son talked about in the particular tone he'd started using around Claire's name without realizing it. His father asked exactly one question about her work. You design things that right, and then spent 40 minutes in the garage showing her the F100 and explaining the transmission rebuild, while she asked questions that were so genuinely curious and specific that his father emerged from the garage 2 hours later with the expression of a man who has decided something important. At dinner, Noah's father said, passing the potatoes. She asks good questions. She does, Noah said. Means she listens. Means she actually wants to know. His father put the bowl down. Gerald, quality observation. Noah blinked. Did you just Eleanor me? Did I what? Never mind. But he was smiling. The thing that none of the planning and negotiating and 7 o'clock phone calls could have prepared either of them for arrived on a Thursday afternoon in early January in the form of a text from a number Claire didn't immediately recognize. The text said, Hey, this is Ryan. I'm in Seattle now. Heard through the industry grapevine you're leading the national creative team. That's incredible. I'd love to catch up. I know some people who might be useful to you. Coffee sometime. She stared at the message for approximately 45 seconds. Then she put her phone face down on her desk and went back to the layout she'd been working on. She stayed on the layout for about 8 minutes. Then she picked up the phone again and read the text 3 more times. She did not tell Noah that evening. Not because she was hiding it. Because she needed to figure out what she thought about it first. And she had not yet figured out what she thought about it. And she did not want to bring Noah chaos before she understood what the chaos was. This was, she recognized even as she did it, the exact thing Noah had called her on in week 2. The processing alone. The withholding until she had it managed. She met Ryan for coffee on a Wednesday. 45 minutes, a coffee place near her office, professional and civil, and carefully boundaried from her end. He had changed in the surface ways that people change better, dressed more professionally polished. In the ways that mattered, he was recognizable. He talked about himself for 22 of the 45 minutes. He mentioned once casually that he'd missed her, and she absorbed that with no particular feeling, which told her something. The useful contacts he'd offered were real. She wrote down 2 names. She would look them up and make her own judgments. She drove home knowing she should tell Noah. She made dinner and called him at 7, and they talked for an hour, and she said nothing about it. That was Wednesday. On Friday, a coworker named Priya posted 4 photos from a work happy hour on her professional Instagram. Claire was in one photo. Ryan was in the same photo. He had come to the happy hour, which Claire had not anticipated, and which she had left 15 minutes after he arrived. She was barely visible in the background. Ryan was in the foreground. Noah saw the photo at 8:22 on Saturday morning because Priya's account was public, and Noah had been loosely following the Seattle design scene since the application and the algorithm had surfaced it, and Ryan Cole was a name and a face he knew, and they were in the same photograph. He held the phone for a while, long enough to feel all the things he was feeling and sort through which ones were legitimate and which ones were fear wearing the costume of legitimacy. Then he booked a flight to Seattle for that afternoon. Not in anger, not in accusation. He booked the flight because the conversation they needed to have was not a phone conversation. And he was the person who had said months ago on a kitchen floor that he would stay in the room. Staying in the room sometimes meant getting on a plane. I was at her door at 7:47 that evening. She opened it, and her face went through three things in rapid succession: surprise, understanding, and something that looked very much like relief. "You saw the photo," she said. "I saw the photo," he said. "Can I come in?" She stepped back. He came in. They stood in her living room and looked at each other. "I met him for coffee last week," she said. "I should have told you. I didn't because I needed to figure out what I thought first, and then I let it become something I hadn't told you, and that's worse than telling you, and it was wrong." She held his gaze. "Not the coffee, the not telling you." "Why coffee?" "He said he knew people who could be useful. He was right about that. He gave me 2 names I followed up on." The professional part was real. She paused. The personal part, him saying he missed me, I felt nothing, which actually made it easier to be clear about. How clear? I left when he showed up at the happy hour. I was there for 15 minutes after he arrived, and then I left. She folded her arms, not defensively, more like she was holding herself accountable. He texted after. I didn't respond. Noah looked at her for a long moment. "Why didn't you tell me about the coffee?" She answered him with his own word. "Fear," she said. "I was afraid you'd react in the way you reacted to the gallery opening question. And then I was afraid that was a reason to not tell you. And using fear of your reaction as a reason to keep secrets that's not a thing I can do. That's not how this works." She met his eyes. "We said honesty even when it's uncomfortable. I broke that." "You did," he said. Not harshly, just accurately. "I know. And I reacted in a way that made you afraid to tell me things," he said. "Which I also need to own." She blinked. "You're not going to be angry. I'm not going to pretend the secrecy didn't hurt," he said. "It did. It's the secrecy, not the coffee. The meeting, I understand. The not telling me that hurt because it means you thought I couldn't handle it." He paused. "Can we agree that's what happened?" "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what happened." "Okay." He exhaled. "And I need to not make you feel like you can't tell me things. Because if you're afraid to tell me things, the space between us fills with things we're not saying, and that's how it ends. Not in a fight. In a slow silence." She looked at him. Something in her face opened. "You flew here for this conversation." "I flew here because this conversation matters, and I don't do the important ones on the phone." He held her gaze. "We said we'd stay in the room." "We said we'd stay in the room," she repeated softly. She set her boundaries with Ryan the next day, sent a clear, professional, unambiguous message. Useful contacts appreciated. Personal contact not something she was interested in. Clean. She showed Noah the message before she sent it. Not because he'd asked her to, because she wanted him in the room for it. He read it. "That's exactly right," he said. She sent it. Ryan responded once professionally, and that was the end of it. On Sunday evening before Noah's Monday morning flight, they sat on her couch with the paper birds on the wall above them, and he said, "I have to tell you something." She turned toward him, alert. "The Seattle company called back," he said. "They want to schedule a formal interview." She went very still. "When?" "They said any time in the next 3 weeks." He met her eyes. "I wanted to tell you in person. I didn't want to do this one on the phone." She looked at him for a long moment. "Are you going to take it if they offer?" "If they offer, and if it's right, and if the timing makes sense for both of us, yes." He held her gaze. "But I need you to know that I am not moving to Seattle because I cannot handle the distance. I am not doing this out of fear. I am doing this because the opportunity is real, and because this—" He gestured at the space between them, at the paper birds, at the apartment that was now completely hers, "is also real. And I'm done pretending that one of those things has to cancel out the other." She reached out and took his hand, held it on the couch between them. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said back. They sat like that for a while. Outside Seattle did its evening thing. Neither of them needed to fill the quiet. The quiet was full enough, already full of everything they'd built over months of 7 o'clock phone calls and honest fights and kitchen floors, and a photo in a social media post, and a same-day flight, and a decision that was still in process, but was already made. Neither of them said that out loud. They were getting better at knowing when something had already been decided before anyone named it. The Seattle company made an offer on a Wednesday afternoon in February, and Noah sat in his truck in a parking lot in Austin for 23 minutes before he called anyone. He didn't call Claire first. He called his father. His dad picked up on the second ring, the way he always did, with the particular economy of a man who answers the phone, the same way he does everything else, present, unhurried, no performance. They offered, Noah said. A pause. The Seattle job. Yeah. Another pause. Not hesitation. His father thinking which sounded different. Is it good work? It's better than what I have. Better pay, better training, path to management if I want it. Noah looked out the windshield at nothing. It's a real step forward. For you, his father said. Not a question, a clarification. For me, Noah confirmed. Not just because of Claire, for me. His father was quiet for a moment. You know what I think about a man who moves across the country for a woman? Noah braced slightly. What? Depends entirely on whether he's running toward something or away from something. His dad's voice was even. You running toward something. Noah thought about the interview. The company's reputation, which he'd researched thoroughly. The projects they worked on, large commercial industrial, the kind of scale that would take everything he knew and require more. The training program. The team he'd met. He thought about all of that separate from Claire, the way you have to think about things clearly before you can think about them together. Yeah, he said. I am. Then go, his father said simply, and don't apologize for it. They hung up. Noah sat for another 4 minutes. Then he called Claire. She answered immediately. Hi, how was your... They offered, he said. Silence. 1 beat. 2. What did they say? He told her the terms. All of them specifically because she deserved the specifics. The salary, the role, the timeline. They wanted him to start in 6 weeks, which was fast, which was also manageable. She listened without interrupting, which was how he knew she was taking it seriously. When he finished, she said, What do you want to do? I want to take it, he said. If you're okay with what that means. What does it mean? It means I'm coming to Seattle, not into your apartment. I want to find my own place, at least at first. We should do this right. We should know what it's like to actually live in the same city, go through ordinary days, and still choose each other. He paused. Not because the distance forced it. Because we chose it. She was quiet long enough that he counted 5 seconds. You want your own place, she said. I want us to build something real. Not something that happened to us. Something we decided. He paused. And I want you to not wake up in a year and feel like I moved into your life instead of building one next to it. She exhaled slowly. That is, she said carefully, the most thoughtful thing you have ever said. I've been working on the ratio. She laughed, short and real. Yes, take the job, Noah. Yeah. Yes, take the job. Find your apartment. Come to Seattle. Her voice was steady and warm and certain. Come here. He accepted the offer the next morning. The following 6 weeks moved fast, the way the important weeks always do, too much in them for the time available. He gave notice at his Austin job, and his employer, a man named Dale, who had been trying to make him a partner for 8 months, took it with the specific grace of someone who had seen it coming and respected the decision, even while being disappointed by it. Dale shook his hand and said, You're good at this work, son. Don't stop being good at it just because the zip code changes. I won't, Noah said. And bring the cactus, Dale said. Don't leave the cactus. Noah blinked. How do you know about the cactus? Dale looked at him. Marcus talks. He packed his apartment in 4 days. Less than he'd expected, he had always lived lightly without accumulating much, which had once felt like efficiency, and now felt like evidence of how carefully he'd been keeping himself ready to leave at any time without losing anything. He looked at the boxes and understood for the first time that traveling light is not always freedom. Sometimes it is just preparation for departure. He left two things behind. The chair on the porch, his chair, the one that had been his for 18 months, because the new tenant would need something to sit on, and that felt right. And the hook on the wall, the one he'd never taken down. He looked at it for a long time on his last evening. Then he decided to leave it too. Some things should stay where they were placed, Eleanor cried. She tried not to. She stood at her door with her hands folded in front of her and her chin raised and said, "Well, you needed to go, so you're going. That's all there is to it." Then her eyes went bright, and she pressed her lips together, and Noah stepped forward and hugged her, and she held on with the particular strength of someone who doesn't hug often, and means it completely when she does. "Gerald would have liked you," she said into his shoulder. "I know," he said. "I would have liked him." He drove to Seattle. Alone this time, which was a different kind of drive than the one with Claire, quieter, more internal. The kind of drive where you have a lot of hours to sit with who you've been and who you're deciding to be. He crossed into Seattle on a Thursday afternoon, and the city received him the way it had received Claire, with the gray specific light, the particular energy of a place that takes its own seriously. I had an apartment. Ready, a small place 4 blocks from Claire's building. A compromise between proximity and independence that both of them had agreed on, and that felt exactly right. He pulled into the parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. He had moved to a new city. He had chosen it with full information, with his eyes open without apology. He texted Claire, "I'm here." She responded in 9 seconds. "I know. I've been watching the GPS tracker since Nevada." He stared at the phone, then typed, "You tracked me from Nevada." She sent back, "I tracked you from the Texas state line, but Nevada is when I started checking every 20 minutes. He sat in the parking lot and laughed out loud, actually laughed to himself in an empty car, and it felt like the right way to arrive somewhere new. She came over that evening with dinner and a plant. A real one, green and specific and requiring particular light, which she'd already researched for his new apartment's window situation. "A plant," he said, holding the door open. "You gave me a cactus when I moved," she said, walking past him into the apartment. "I'm giving you a proper plant, something that actually requires care." She set it on the windowsill and turned around. "Welcome to Seattle." He looked at her, standing in his new apartment in his new city, with a plant on his windowsill and dinner in a bag, and the particular expression she wore when she was happy and trying to be practical about it. "Thank you for coming here," she said. "Thank you for making it worth coming to," he said. She crossed the room and kissed him. He held on. The apartment smelled like fresh paint, and her, which was the best combination of new and familiar he could have designed on purpose. They ate dinner on the floor because the furniture wasn't arriving until Saturday, and they talked about his route and her week and the junior designer on her team, Priya, who had turned out to be extraordinary and who was being properly credited for everything. Now, after the Greg situation had resolved itself, with Greg being quietly moved to a role with significantly less authority over creative output. "Justice," Noah said. "Institutional correction," Claire said precisely. "Which is the same thing but takes longer and involves more documentation." He helped her with a campaign concept she'd been stuck on, which surprised her. He asked questions she hadn't thought to ask, the kind that came from looking at things from outside the industry entirely. And twice she stopped mid-sentence and said, "Wait," and grabbed her notebook and wrote something down. "You're good at this," she said, looking up from the notebook. "I'm good at figuring out what's not working." "That's literally what design is." "Then maybe I've been in the wrong field." She laughed. "You're in exactly the right field. You just also have other skills." She looked at him. "You're going to like it here, Noah." "I already do," he said. 6 months after the drive to Seattle. 1 year after the night, a woman knocked on a door at 11:46 p.m. In the middle of the worst heat wave Austin had seen in 30 years, they drove back to Texas together. Not to move back, to go back to the lake. It was a weekend trip. Noah had the time. Claire had negotiated a Friday off. They drove down Thursday evening and stayed with his father, who made them the best breakfast either of them had ever eaten on Friday morning, and then spent 2 hours in the garage with Claire, who had started asking questions about the F-100 restoration process that had now reached a level of genuine technical specificity that suggested she had been reading about it, which she admitted under questioning, and which Noah's father received with quiet, enormous pleasure. They borrowed his truck, not the F-100, the everyday one, and drove out to the lake on Friday evening. The pier was still there. Still the same uneven boards, still the same particular creek on the fourth plank from the end. The lake was the same. The moon was not quite the same angle as the first night, but close enough to matter. Claire set her canvas bag down at the end of the pier. Noah looked at it. "Go ahead," she said. I unzipped it. 2 towels, 2 bottles of water, and 2 swimsuits, actual swimsuits, folded neatly at the bottom of the bag. He looked up at her. "The first time," she said, "I didn't bring one because I needed something to force the moment. I needed a reason for neither of us to be able to pretend we weren't there for the real thing." She held his gaze. "Tonight we don't need that. We stopped pretending a long time ago." He looked at the swimsuits, then at her. "You've been planning this speech." "I've been thinking about it for weeks," she said, completely unashamed. "I think it's good." "It's very good," he agreed. They changed. They swam. They raced to the end of the pier and back, and she won this time. Legitimately, she did not cheat. He would admit that, and they argued about it in the water, with the specific joy of 2 people who have learned to argue well, which means without fear, without the part where you wonder if the other person is going to leave. They ended up where they always ended up, hanging off the pier ladder side by side, just breathing. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said back. "I want to show you something." He pulled himself up onto the pier and reached into his jacket pocket, which he'd left folded on the boards. He pulled out his phone and turned it toward her. On the screen were architectural drawings. Modest, specific, a house with a wide porch and enough rooms, and a particular room off the back that had large windows and built-in shelving, and a wall cleared for whatever someone might want to put there. A studio. She pulled herself up onto the pier and took the phone. Looked at the drawings for a long time. "This is in Seattle," she said. "It's a neighborhood 20 minutes from your office, 22 from my company." He sat next to her. "I've been talking to a broker. It's not a decision, it's a possibility I'm looking at." He paused. "The porch faces west. It gets the afternoon light. And there's a room that I think you know what it's for." She looked at the studio room. At the wall that was just a wall in the drawing, but was clearly sized for paper birds if a person wanted to put them there. "You measured for the installation," she said. "I asked you how big it was 3 months ago. You said 12 feet by 9. You thought I was just listening." He held her gaze. "I was taking notes." She stared at him. Her eyes were doing the bright thing. "Noah Carter, it's just a possibility," he said. "We look at it together. We decide together. If it's not right, we find something else, or we keep the apartments, or we figure out whatever is next with the information we have at the time." He held the phone out. "But I wanted you to see that I've been thinking about after." She took the phone. Looked at the drawing again, the wide porch, the west-facing light, the room with the cleared wall. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask me anything." She lowered the phone, looked at him directly. "Do you know how far we've come?" I thought about it. The real answer, not the easy one. 11 months of coffee on a shared porch and pretending a line wasn't there. A knock at midnight in the middle of a heat wave. A lake. A cactus. A diner. A studio full of paper birds. A drive to Seattle with 2 bags and 1 crate marked fragile and worth it. Months of 7 o'clock phone calls and honest fights and kitchen floors, and a same-day flight and a job offer and a parking lot and a plant on a new windowsill. "Yeah," he said. "I know exactly how far." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The lake was still and dark and enormous the way it had been a year ago. And above them, the Texas sky was doing everything it always does when you're finally paying attention to it. "You know what I keep thinking about," she said. "Tell me. That night when I was standing on the porch deciding whether to knock." She paused. "I almost didn't. I was standing there for 4 minutes in the heat arguing with myself, and I almost went back inside." "But you knocked," he said. I knocked, she said. And you almost didn't open the door. But I opened it, he said. She tilted her head up and looked at him. Every good thing that happened came from those two decisions. Two people choosing to not let fear make the choice. He looked at her. 1 year ago, on this exact pier, he had stepped off the edge into dark water, not knowing what came next, and the world had not ended. It had opened. The midnight swim didn't save us, he said. It just stopped us from pretending. Yes, she said. Everything after that, that's the real story. He kissed the top of her head. She settled against him. The pier held them the same way it had held them a year ago, creaking slightly solid enough. I was 33 years old and living in a city he'd chosen on purpose. He had work he was good at and a woman beside him who had knocked on his door at the exact right moment and refused to let him hide behind logic and distance, and the ghost of someone who had taught him his life wasn't enough. His life, as it turned out, was exactly enough. It was more than enough. It had just needed someone willing to stand on a porch for 4 minutes and decide that not knowing was better than never asking. He had needed the same courage. They had both found it. Not in a single moment, not at a midnight lake, not in a cactus or a canvas bag or a crate of paper birds. They had found it in the ordinary, repeated daily choice to show up honestly for each other through the hard conversations and the missed flights and the kitchen floors and the wrong turns and the things they'd gotten wrong before they got them right. Real love is not the moment it begins. Real love is everything you choose to do after that moment when the water is cold and the future is uncertain and you jump in anyway. Both of them understood that now, and they were only just getting started.